I don't know if it was 2008 and 2009 or principally 2009, and it's just finishing up now, is called Piso Firme, which is, it's basically a survey of people who have, what kind of flooring people have in their dwelling, in their housing. So how many people are living in conditions with dirt floors, and how many people have wood, how many people have tile. And it's a subcontracted piece of work from the Social Development Agency, and some people feel like that's closer to the heart of the organization. Others, want to hang out more often with the United Nations Development Program and develop, the next model for monitoring voter coercion. That's like the pinnacle now, is to try to figure out how to detect pre-electoral manipulation of voters through coercive, carrots or sticks. But how to systematically do that is hard. So Alianza Civica pioneered a monitoring technique for monitoring bias in the media, and they want to be the pioneer of the vote fraud monitoring. One faction. Another faction would rather be out there trying to organize their same civic groups who monitored elections in the past, try to get people fired up with a new task to go do a survey of what the flooring is like, to get a better development indicator for differences in different areas of the country. And that has been a real tension. And there's tension among the groups. The organization is organized, there's a national office, which has the professional staff, which is a relatively small group. And then there's volunteer coordinators in different states, and those state-level organizations are made up of different types of combinations of social organizations. So one interesting thing is that in a few, increasingly fewer areas, they're socially conservative groups, the Coalition for the Family in the Yucatan. But in most of them, they're human rights groups or left progressive groups that are frustrated because there's not a good left political party alternative on the side. And in Coahuila, there's a bunch of radical, union organizers who wanted to have autonomous unions since the beginning of time. And they come to meetings and they don't want anything to do with methodology. They want to get people on the streets. So there is a lot of tension within the organization. I mean, I think some of that is good, but some of it in this current period has led to a bit of a split personality. And the organization increasingly starts to look like it's just going where the opportunities are rather than pushing a coherent movement for democracy forward.
I was just going to ask if that was a common tendency among groups that are social movements, and then when they become part of the institutional part of society, if that's a common factor that they go through.
I'm interested in that, and I think that it is. I mean, there was a lot of literature on this about a decade ago in the context of Latin America, sort of how opposition civil societies became, took on roles of subsidiarity to government, and basically how it compromised maybe their social mission. And I think those tensions are present in a lot of different types of organizations. In other countries in the Americas, I see differences. The domestic monitoring organization profile, there's really hardcore groups that are really doing a lot of work and have longevity, like Alianza Civica. There's a whole set of those types of groups. And then there's some that just pop in and out only for election. And usually in countries that have still more problematic elections. And then there's a few that are sort of phantom organizations. It's a little hard to tell what, if anything, they're doing at any given time. But of the larger groups, I would say some of them have acquired a more professionalized identity and do broad-ranging work, but with substantial resources. Others, like Alianza Civica, are in that kind of middle zone. They haven't quite resolved that issue of organizational identity. Yeah, sort of. I mean, there's periodic discussions about whether the organization can disband, but nobody can ever seem to let it go. They're always, and after 2006 with the whole election scandal that year, there was a lot more interest. Again, a bit of a renewed interest in trying to do a better job of creating better conditions for elections that would be credible. But some of this is very context-driven. It's hard to generalize.
One more?
Yeah, sure.
Is there any indication that the fact that a DMO was there for one election causes the general population that did vote in that election to vote in the next election?
You know, I looked at turnout. I didn't show you my slides, but voter turnout in Mexico, for example, shows predictable patterns. Higher turnout for presidential and lower for legislative, and since 1994, relatively steady decline over time. So there's no real clear trend to be perceived there. I will say that there's a body of research that's been growing very recently on international election observation, and increasingly there's consensus that there is an observer effect. Now, most of this research is in the context of international observers, but and very few people are writing just on the domestic observers, but there's no reason, I think, that it wouldn't hold. And this effect is that whoever is in the opposition tends to get a higher number of votes, all else being equal, in voting sites where observers are present. And so this is taken to be an observer effect, that people feel more free to vote. The opposition vote in this literature, Susan Hyde and Judith Kelly are the two authors writing most about this. The opposition vote is taken as a proxy for fairness. You know, if the opposition can gain a greater vote share than you would expect based on previous elections, then people must be feeling free to vote. And it's really interesting because what they've done in this research is they've logged, they've found vote patterns by polling site. They know which polling sites had international observers present, and they match those, paired to similar demographic polling sites where no observer was present. And so that's how they're detecting this effect. And that's really interesting, but it's a new finding for the literature because most of the qualitative work has said, we really can't show an effect, but now that people have been looking at this over a longer period of time and in broader context, we see a general overall trend that monitoring is increasing and that there is an effect of having observers present. So I'm still working to figure out what the domestic observers truly bring to the next season. And how many people here know where their polling site is? Will you get back to me and let me know if any civic observers are there? Yes. All right.
All right, thank you.